Of all the components and systems on a vehicle today, the steering and suspension system is one of the more complex, made up of many, many parts, from shocks and springs to bearings and bushes. They all work together to keep a car pointing straight and true. A knock from a pothole, a hit on a curb, can throw the system out, and as a safety critical element, that can cause big problems for a driver. It's not just about comfort either. The steering suspension system also helps with braking efficiency and with ride handling, which means that if either the system is damaged or not functioning properly, it could be noticeable. But at the same time, there are so many components in there that there could be some hidden problems as well, which is why offering a suspension check and service is a good way to ensure drivers stay safe, but also to ensure that you're able to offer the best level of performance to your customers.
Cars are becoming more complex, and therefore so are the systems and components that go into them. The steering suspension system, while key on all types of vehicle, is not immune to this. The system is also susceptible to knocks and bumps. Faulty or broken suspension is the second most common cause of MOT failures, with around 20% of tests out because of suspension-related issues. But just how complex is modern suspension technology, and what do garages need to understand about it?
Obviously, due to the safety critical section or area of steering suspension, it's imperative that everything is working as it should do, even down to suspension alignments, especially on modern vehicles, because there's so many adjustments that you can do on them. So even if you fit a new part, generally you need to do an alignment check to make sure everything is correct. If it's not checked regularly, i.e. if you get any noises or knocking or any bang from it, it needs to be checked as soon as possible, because obviously if you get something that breaks on the suspension, that's what's keeping your car actually on the road and your tyres in contact with the tarmac. So it's all safety critical. It's one of the imperative things, along with braking. It only takes a small knock in the wrong place, in the wrong direction on the suspension to actually physically bend something, and you may not realise that it's bent. The car still may drive correctly, but obviously the suspension alignment can be knocked out of alignment. From the aspect of steering suspension development, generally, other than the lighter weight, obviously multi-link as well, whereas on an old car, maybe a McPherson strut, you'd have the McPherson struts the top link and the one arm, steel arm at the bottom link. Now you have multi-link suspension, so you might have 4 actual suspension arms on one side of the vehicle on the front. And that just helps ride suspension geometry just to improve handling. And especially now with the lower profile tyres and the bigger wheels that they're actually fitting, it becomes more important to actually have a very strong link that's not going to move around so much. Also, the bushings have become a lot stiffer. And there's hydraulic bushing coming in, which is all for noise harshness, to try and cut that down.
The automotive market is also undergoing a number of changes as electric vehicles come in, which are heavier, and car makers position themselves for the future with autonomous driving solutions. But these cars will still be underpinned by suspension systems. They just have to work harder to ensure that they still remain safe despite the increased pressures upon them.
Well, I think it's critical, and it's always going to be critical. I mean, suspension is always going to be part of vehicles, isn't it? Even with technology moving so far forward in terms of internal combustion engines, EV hybrids, suspension is still really important. Even on your self-driving cars, the suspension's there to ensure stability, braking control. It allows obviously for the acceleration and power to be put down safely. So even with self-driving cars, suspension is absolutely critical to make sure safety and also passenger comfort. The suspension system collectively is one of the most safety critical parts of the drivetrain. So it's really important that it's maintained and looked after. for us in the wonderful UK, our roads are in a terrible condition, and winter obviously exacerbates that. But that being said, it doesn't stop you bumping a curb when you're driving during the summertime or any other time of the year. So regardless of the season and what time of the year it is, when a car comes into a workshop for a service, anytime it should be, absolutely top of priority list to ensure that the suspension is thoroughly inspected.
We've all made that face when we hit a pothole or a heavy bump and we feel the shock jar through our bodies and obviously the car itself. But what damage is that doing to the underneath? And over time, how much damage is being accrued by these constant knocks, bangs and bumps? Well, that's where a free suspension check can help. But what should technicians be looking out for when it comes to cars coming in for that kind of work?
Uneven tyre wear, poor handling. So obviously, if it's bent a lower arm backwards, the caster angle goes out as well. But with power steering, you can't really feel it as much as the older cars that had just manual steering. But also, depending on how the bend is, on how serious it is, it could then start to fracture, and that's when it becomes a serious issue. Especially now, since everything's gone to aluminium, due to trying to make the vehicles as light as possible, more efficient. And dare I say it, the condition of the roads at the moment, the amount of potholes, you may not know that you've actually got any damage to the suspension. So if they can just do a visual inspection, it doesn't really take that long either. Just getting the car up in the air and just checking all the ball joints, visually checking any of the arms to make sure they don't look as though they're out of alignment seriously.
Visual inspection of all of the suspension components, because even if a customer presents the vehicle with a specific noise or fault, it may be that that's symptomatic, but it might not be the cause. So it's really important that the full suspension system is inspected and checked for any wear or any damage, because as I say, you might get a knocking noise or you might get a pull one way or the other, but that might just be the start of the problem. So it's really critical that all components are inspected to make sure they're all in alignment. And if any of the major components on the suspension system are replaced, again, a four-wheel alignment is absolutely critical, because any even minor misalignment can cause premature wear of the tyres, it can cause premature wear of other suspension components, increase in fuel consumption, and again, most critically, if everything is not aligned correctly, it can be a safety issue.
So with the continued deterioration of UK roads and more complex components going into the suspension geometry these days, garages have got an opportunity to offer free checks and ensure customers are remaining safe on the roads. Suspension is one of those components that's going to be around in any car, no matter what its powertrain type, no matter what its drive type, be it self-driving or human-driven. So there is always that component that you can rely on to be fixed in your workshop.